In the classic movie Groundhog Day, the actor Bill Murray acts for the main protagonist of the movie, who is a TV anchor, very upset, not a very kind person, and he has to go to some city and tell about the Groundhog Day, which is the day that you can use this animal, the groundhog, to predict the winter. The reason I'm telling you all this story is that there's a very unique thing that happened in this day. And this is that the day after, Bill Murray wakes up at the same day, and the same events repeat themselves. He tries to resolve it, get away from the city. He doesn't manage to do it. He tries to commit suicide. He only comes back again to the same spot. Every day repeats itself. At first, he gets crazy. But then he tells to himself, I can do a lot of things with this knowledge because there's no consequences to what I do. I can eat as much as I want. I don't get fat. I wake up the same the day after. I can try to rob a bank and succeed because I know all the movements of people with money and nothing will happen to me anyway. And then he has an idea. He walks over to a beautiful lady that is sitting in a restaurant, and he asks her, who was your literature teacher in 3rd grade? She gives him a name, and he goes away. She's surprised, but doesn't do anything about it. The day after, he comes to the same lady. She does recognize him. It's the same day repeating. And he says, I know you. We sat together on this Mrs. Somebody literature class. From that moment on, falling in love with this lady is very, very easy, and he manages to find himself at her bed and proposing the same night. Why is that? Why does it work? Why does she care that somebody that she doesn't recognize, because she never saw before in her life, says that they were together 30 years ago in the literature class? Now, the reason is that humans are probably programmed this way. If we believe that we experienced something before with somebody, this makes us trust them more. Think about it. How many times did you try to collaborate with people that you knew from your childhood or from earlier in life? These are your friends, these are people you support. The role of a great speaker is to recreate the same emotion. We can't go back in time like Bill Murray, but we have other techniques that we can use, and that's the technique of telling anecdotes. That will be the focus of the lecture today. My name is Shai Lotan. I'm Associate Professor of International Public Law at the University of Copenhagen Faculty of Law, and this series of lectures is designed to improve your English as well as your presentation skills. My philosophy of telling anecdotes goes back to a great teacher of public speaking called Lillian Wilder. I'm an Israeli, and she has a special role in Israeli history because it's known that Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been a Prime Minister of Israel for so many years, learned a lot from her and used a lot of her technique. And she had, at the time, decades ago, cassettes that you can listen to and learn how to become a better speaker. And she explained the importance of anecdotes. Not only of anecdotes, she always said you need to get some kind of a response from the audience if you want them to love you. And you can do that by telling a joke, and we will speak about later, not in this video. You can do that by making certain provocations that get them involved, sometimes angry a little bit, but then supporting you. You can do that by asking them questions that involve them and they provide you with answers. And you can also do that by telling anecdotes. The anecdotes make the audience believe that you and them are in the same group, just like in a movie. Even if you can't recreate a scenario in which you study together, you were together somehow. You give this psychological imagination that you were together doing something. So when you tell a story, you are listening together to the story. You are also together on a certain quest, on a certain adventure. Now what I'm going to do now is divide the stories to 3 different levels. The best, medium level, and the hardest level to succeed if you really want to engage the audience. The story that is the ideal story is a story that is shared between you and the audience. Because then you hit the jackpot. That's exactly what Bill Murray was doing. You tell the story that you were together in the literature class before, the crowd is with you. So how can you do that? One possibility is, if, for example, if you're in a conference and something very memorable happened in a conference a year ago, let's say somebody that everybody respects received an important award and he gave an excellent speech and people were crying. Okay, we all together in a room when this happened, and then I can use that as an anecdote. So that's one example. Another example is when you're actually not together physically, you maybe didn't know about each other's existence, but you experience something that is very similar. Now here, one of the disadvantages of getting old is that your students are so much young, they don't have the same set of experience. When I was talking to students, 15 years ago, it was very easy to bring as an anecdote September 11th. Everybody remembered it. Everybody remember how they felt at the time. And if you tell your own September 11th story, in a way you engage in everybody else, because everybody has a September 11th story to some extent, all over the world. I was in Israel at the time. I didn't have anything to do with the United States. Today I have students that some of them were not even born when this happened. And then if you're looking for an anecdote that is similar, it has to be a closer event. So the best anecdote is an anecdote that describes a shared experience when both you and the audience were together in a similar situation, felt the same feelings, and this can lead you on towards an argument that you based on that. The second level is a story that is about you, not the audience. And I tell such stories all the time, and it's one of, I think, the most important things for me as a teacher is being able to rely on this experience. I tell stories about academia, how I got a job in Copenhagen, for example, conferences that I presented in. I tell stories about my service in the army, which involves work as a prosecutor. So that's something that I do almost every class, certainly every course. There are several times when I will describe this. And for me, that's partly giving my experience as a way for the students to learn, because they want to be lawyers and they want some of them also to go to academia. And it's also a way to engage the audience, because when you tell a story that really happened to you, everybody is going to understand that, and it's going to be more memorable, and it's going to be inviting them on this private journey. So even though it didn't happen that you were together before in the same place or in the same time, you're putting them on the same ship with you, and you're sailing toward a common direction when you describe a story that really happened to you. The third level of stories is stories that did not happen to you, did not happen to the audience, happened to somebody, maybe even a fictional story. It's just telling a story. Now here you have to be careful. You can in a way invite the audience together because they all listen to the story and you're telling it at the same time. And that's what people do. We tell stories to engage our audience. And if you tell an anecdote that really happened, this is something that you can build with. You need to be careful not to tell a story that too many of your students or the audience knows. If everybody knows the story, it's a bit stale. You don't have to worry about if there's nobody that knows the story, because usually there are some stories that are a bit repetitive. Like the common story, for example, about the man that fixed the expensive machine and asked for $1,001,000. $1 for the effort and $1 million for the study that he put before. That's a nice anecdote. You can dress it up as a whole story and provide it to the listeners, and probably some of them knew some version of that, but it will not necessarily damage it. But notice when you're doing that, you need to make it very vivid, because if you just did it like what I did now, a reference to a story, it's not going to work. In fact, it's exactly the opposite emotional reaction. It's kind of presenting this as just a piece of information or something that was said before that I'm not engaged with. I'm not on this ship sailing towards this direction. So what you want to do, if you are telling a story that is not a shared experience and is not a private experience, be very careful to provide vivid details and emphasize the storytelling. And you do that partly by the words that you are saying, and partly by the other tools that we discussed before that include the pitch of your voice, the volume of your voice, your pauses, your body language, how much you move around the room. All these things are very, very important to make the story vivid and make sure that the audience is with you, because that's the goal. The goal is that they feel that they go together on a common adventure with you. You are hunting mammoths together. Everybody is coming together on the same quest. How do you make sure that the audience is with you? So first, let's start from the basics. You need to slow down. You have to remember that you already know the story and you're just retelling it, and the audience does not. So speaking slowly, making strategic pauses is very, very important. The other thing that is important is not to omit important pieces of information, which is something that most of us do subconsciously when we tell a story. Here, I got this insight from a book by Steven Pinker. He has a chapter in his book about how to write, which is, by the way, a great book if you're interested in writing, which a lot of my listeners are. The chapter is called The Curse of Knowledge. And the curse of knowledge basically means the following thing. We think that our audience knows things that they don't know because we know them. And the example that Steven Pinker gives is a real experiment that was done with toddlers or babies, where they would go and they would stand and see something in the room when they understand that they are only seeing and not being seen. And they would see somebody that would come into the room and hide a candy below a pillow when it's invisible. You cannot see that unless you have seen it when a person was placed there. And then another baby would enter the room, and the babies that are watching as an audience, they become very agitated because somehow a part of them believes that the baby that just entered the room, that did not see the man hiding the candy, that couldn't see the candy because it's hidden behind the pillow, should know that the candy is behind the pillow. We have this instinct. Now, as we get older, we may be able to hone our instincts so that we do less of that. And what Steven Pinker is doing is teaching us how to write in a way that doesn't involve that. So we're telling the whole story without any gaps. But still, when you're telling an anecdote to an audience, that's a time when you are the most prone to this mistake, because you don't have infinite time to go back and edit your drafts as you do when you're doing writing. And you're telling something that you know very well, either because it happened to you or because it's a story that you rehearsed many times, and it's very, very easy to omit important details. And that's exactly what I want you to be aware of. So remember, the audience did not hear this story, or at least we hope that most of them did not hear this story. So you need to go through all the details. Even if you look obvious to you, you need to go through them. So that's an important thing as well. And the most important thing, as you're telling the story, I go back to Lillian Wilder and the idea of taking a response. She explained that when you're doing public speaking, you are communicating. Communicating goes in two ways. Also, the audience communicates with you. Now, there are ways of getting a response that are very rare. Okay, you can get people clapping their hands and exclamations of great excitement. That's really more for political rallies like what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing, not for the classroom. But it doesn't mean that the same principle doesn't apply. It applies very well. Your audience is all the time communicating with you. They're communicating with you by being, for example, silent instead of talking to each other, by looking at you, by following you with their eyes around the room, by sometimes, if it's a very, very large classroom and it gets a bit more impersonal, one of the things that I see is that I could hear from the students typing on their keyboard. I could hear the music of a keyboard, and that's a way for them to communicate with me. So if it's 50 students, they're all busy at the keyboards, I could see when they think what I'm saying is very important, they need to write it, and when not to. So you have these visual and vocal cues all the time around you. You need to be aware of them, and we spoke about that. When you are presenting, you have to look the audience in the eyes. You have to make sure that you're constantly responding to their communication with you. It's essential when you're dealing with anecdotes. Sometimes I would start to tell a story, I would get almost instinctively by these vocal and visual cues, the fact that the audience is a bit impatient, I would cut it short. I would not do what I planned. Sometimes I see that the audience is electrified. They're listening to me. They want to get as much as possible from the story. And therefore, I maybe stall the story a little bit and get it a little bit longer, providing all these vivid details, all these details that I think are obvious, so that the audience gets everything and get ready to the story. So telling anecdotes is a very important skill as a public speaker. Knowing how to do that in English requires a lot of practice. That's a practice that you acquire by speaking. And I think that if you follow the insights that we discussed today, so all the time think about communicating, getting a response, trying to make it as personal as possible so the audience feels that they're together with you on the same quest, you can use it to become a great speaker.